Welcome to the California Avocado Society seminar, grower seminar. We have a number of people that are going to speak today. Mary Lou Arpaia will speak second. She's our horticulture specialist, or excuse me, post-harvest specialist at UC Riverside, working out of Kearney Field Station near Fresno. And Tim Spann. Tim Spann is the Director of Research for the California Avocado Society. Mary Lou is going to be talking about pollination in general and new varieties. Tim's going to be talking about gibberellic acid and how it's used and what the experiences of growers have been. Peter Cosina from the Integrated Pest Management Program is with us. He is coordinating this, and thank you, Peter. We also have some sponsors that I'd like to thank. Index Fresh, Westpac, Mission Produce, Calavo, Del Rey Avocado, Westphalia Fruit, Nutrient Ag Solutions, Farm Credit West, Westbridge Agricultural Products, and Brocon Nursery. So with that, I'll leave it up to Tim Spann to take the reins and go. Oh, excuse me. So Tim is going to take a little break in between, and we can answer questions. Mary Lou would prefer to leave the questions till the end. If you would please ask your questions in the Q&A, the question and answer section. That way we can document the questions and answer them as they come up. And if there's more detailed responses, we can get back to you. So with that, Timothy Spann, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Good morning, everyone. Afternoon, depending where you are. That is my beautiful avocado grove here in Tennessee behind me. No, it is not. So, come on. There we go. Okay, so Ben said I am the research director for the California Avocado Commission. So for those of you who don't know, I am no longer officially an employee of the California Avocado Commission. I am still fulfilling all the duties of the research director, but I now do that as an independent contractor with the commission. And so at the end of the presentation, I have all of my current information, phone number, email, if you're trying to reach me. So with that, I will start talking about gibberellic acid use in avocados. And I need to note the front end of this presentation, a very big thank you to Carol Lovett. Carol did all of the research over probably about a dozen years in total to collect all the data necessary to get the registration for gibberellic acid use on avocados. And the front end of this presentation is largely put together from slides that she has shared in other presentations. So I just want to give credit where credit is due. A lot of, even though I'm presenting, it is not my original work. So what is gibberellic acid, or GA3 as I will abbreviate it sometimes throughout the presentation? So it's a naturally occurring plant hormone. It's found in plants and fungi. It promotes growth and elongation of cells. There are 136 different known gibberellic acids. GA3 happens to be the one that's used the most often commercially in a commercial format in products used as a plant growth regulator. It's produced commercially through a fermentation process using the fungus Gibberella fujikiroi, however you pronounce that. So that does mean it's organic because it's produced naturally through this fermentation process. And I know that's been a big question for a lot of people is, can I use it in organic production? Yes, you can. There are many different commercially available formulations of GA3. It is no longer under patent. So the process is open to generics. However, we will be specifically talking about the product called ProGib LV Plus from Valent Biosciences. And I'll get into why we're specifically talking about that one product and not any of the other generics that are on the market. So ProGib LV Plus, it's produced by Valent Biosciences. They're out of Illinois, just outside of Chicago. The LV is a low volatile organic compound formulation. So a number of years ago, California, because of air quality regulations, went to a lot of pesticide companies and told them they had to reformulate products to meet low VOC standards. And so to differentiate that formulation of ProGib from previous formulations, they added the LV. So it's ProGib LV Plus is a specific product that you can use on avocados. The original formulation of ProGib is going away. There may still be some old stocks out there that are legal to use, but you cannot use them on avocados. So advantages of ProGib LV Plus: 4-hour re-entry interval, 0-day pre-harvest interval, and again, it can be used in organic grows. So at the end of March in 2018, California Department of Pesticide Regulation approved a special local needs registration for ProGib LV Plus for use on avocados in California. That special local needs registration, which you see here on the right side of your screen, is good through March 31st, 2023. I'll explain a little bit why we have a special local needs registration and we don't have a full label for the product. When California told Valent that they needed to reformulate the product to be a low VOC formulation, they also realized that Valent had added a lot of crops to the label that they did not have efficacy data for. And so DPR told Valent, you cannot add any new crops to the label for ProGib LV Plus until you clean up all that old stuff and you produce efficacy data for all of those crops that you've listed on the label, or you remove them from the label. So our way around that, rather than having to wait for Valent to get all that efficacy data on existing crops, we were able to do a special local needs. The plan is that by the time we get to 2023, Valent will have finished their process of collecting the necessary efficacy data. They'll have satisfied DPR, and we will then be able to have a full label for avocados. We use GA on avocados to increase fruit size and yield. You are restricted currently to 1 application per year, and the rate is 12.5 fluid ounces per acre. While we have the special local needs registration, you must have a copy of the SLN label with you anytime you're applying GA, in addition to the label that's on the product bottle. If you don't have a copy of this, you can get it from the CAC website. Just Google gibberellic acid or search for gibberellic acid on the CAC website, and you will get a copy of this label. So you have to have that special label with you when you're applying it under the SLN. So let's talk about application. Again, you're allowed 1 application per year. You need to apply this product at the cauliflower stage of inflorescence development. So the upper picture on the right side of your screen is a good example of the cauliflower stage of inflorescence development. You see the inflorescence is nice and tight, resembling a head of cauliflower, thus the name for the stage. When approximately 50% of the trees in your grove have 50% of their bloom at that stage, that's when you want to go with the application. That means 25% of your bloom is going to be too early, 25% is going to be more developed. If you have to make a judgment call, it's better to apply GA too late than too early. If you're before the cauliflower stage, the bloom does not respond to GA application. It will still respond at the later stage, like you see at the lower right of your screen. But once you have actual open flowers, they again are no longer responsive to GA. So somewhere between that cauliflower stage, as shown on the upper right, and that that expanded cauliflower that you see on the lower right. That's what you're targeting. You want to make sure the majority of your bloom is at that stage. You want to apply this like a pesticide spray. You need good full canopy coverage, especially of those developing inflorescences. You do not spray to runoff. You can apply it by air or ground. And I'll speak to the ground issue here for a minute on the next slide. Again, 12.5 ounces per acre is what you use. That's 25 grams of active ingredient, no more, no less. Carol did a lot of work on this to dial in the dose. At a lower rate, you don't see the effect. At a higher rate, you're just wasting money. There's no benefit at all to going to a higher rate. So stick with the label rate, 12.5 ounces per acre. That's what you want to use. Okay, ground application. On the SLN, it says you have to have 100 gallons of water per acre for a ground application. We don't know where that came from. All of Carol's trial work was done with 200 to 250 gallons of water on ground applications. Somewhere between CAC, Carol, and Valence and writing the label, 100 gallons got in there and it wasn't caught, and that's what went to DPR, and that's what DPR approved. I know specifically in Ventura County, the Ag Commissioner has done a generic sign off that going to a higher volume of water is okay. I don't know about the other counties. I believe maybe Santa Barbara has also approved that. I know Jane Delahoyt's on, so maybe she can put something in the comments, because I know Jane's pretty knowledgeable about that, particularly for Ventura and at least Santa Barbara counties. If you're outside of those counties, just check with your Ag Commissioner. There really is no reason why they should have an issue with you going to a higher gallonage. Again, you still can only use that 12.5 ounces per acre, but you can potentially up the gallonage to improve coverage with a ground application. Aerial application is 12.5 ounces in 75 gallons of water. That there's no wiggle room on. Again, Carol did all the research on that, looking at the volume with aerial application and what gave you the best penetration in the canopy and coverage of the inflorescences. And 75 gallons is where you want to be for aerial. I know it's a little higher than what we use for a lot of stuff, but that's really what you need to use if you're going to go aerial with GA. Your final spray solution pH should be 5.5 to 6. If you get into very high pHs above 8.5, it degrades the material and you will lose all efficacy. So adjust your pH if you need to. Citric acid, other products, you guys are very well aware of how to adjust your pH for spray solutions. You probably do it for other products. And then you also want to use a pure organosilicone surfactant, something like Silhouette 77 or Widespread Max. And 0.05% is the final concentration that you're targeting for the surfactant. Tank mixes. This has been a huge issue. The label does not restrict tank mixes. So you are free by the label to go ahead and tank mix to your heart's desire. But we have extremely limited data on the efficacy and the safety of doing that, okay? If you are going to try a tank mix, you need to do a jar test ahead of time to make sure there's no issue with that tank mix, that nothing's going to precipitate out. For boron and urea specifically, which prior to GA were our two things that we used for bloom applications to improve fruit set and fruit development, you don't really want to mix those. They don't act synergistically. So, boron is good, urea is good, GA is good. The combinations from the limited data that we have do not work well. Particularly, we know previously from Carol's work that when you mix boron and urea, you get a lot of double pistil flowers that develop, that produce misshapen fruit, or that fruit aborts. And research down in Mexico with GA and urea found a similar thing. We do have a trial going on at Pine Tree Ranch in Santa Paula, looking at the combinations of GA with boron and with urea. Until that's done, I don't have any data to share with you, unfortunately. We lost the harvest data last year, so we missed a year of the trial. We redid the application, so as soon as we get to harvest this year, we'll have some data, and hopefully, I'll have some information to share with you on that. But for right now, I would caution against boron and urea specifically. If you want to throw in some other micros, an agromech application or whatever, do the jar test and make sure you're following the label directions for anything you're tank mixing. But boron and urea, I would recommend shying away from at this point. So what does GA do? So again, Carol did a lot of work over a number of years, and this is basically the summary of combining all of that data. So from all of those orchards combined, GA produced a minimum of a 22-pound net increase in total yield per tree. So, if you're talking about 110 trees per acre, do the math, you're somewhere at, 2,300 pounds per acre of additional yield. The trees in the trial that she used yielded anywhere from 44 to 373 pounds per tree. Again, this is from the south to the north, all different groves where she did this. So that's a minimum net increase of 2,425 pounds for 110 trees in orchards, producing 4,800 pounds to 41,000 pounds. Whoa, sorry. There we go, back where we were, per acre. So for an orchard at 3,300 pounds per acre, there was a 51% average increase of 1,884 pounds per acre. In all cases, in addition to a total increase in yield in terms of poundage, there was also an increase in fruit size. So more of the fruit landed in that 40s, 48s, 60s size categories, as well as total poundage. So you didn't just end up with more small fruit. You ended up with more fruit and more of that sweet spot where we really want our fruit to be for maximum prices. So the average net increases in yield, 54% as pounds per tree, and a 62% net increase in fruit sizes of 60s, 48s, and 40s, a 68% as number of fruit per tree, and a 61% increase of fruit in the sizes of 60, 48, and 40s. So some additional benefits of GA3. It significantly increases the pounds and fruit number per tree if you have a minimum yield potential. You cannot take a tree that isn't producing bloom or for whatever reason isn't going to set any fruit. GA is not going to magically work and produce produce a crop for you. You have to have the yield potential there within the tree to have something for GA to work on. Significant increases in yield were seen averaged across on and off years. So that means that the 2-year cumulative yield in alternate bearing orchards was significantly higher. What you see with GA is you see more of a yield effect in an on year. Again, it goes to the fact that you have to have the potential there for the product to work with in order to see a good result. So you actually see an increase in yield in the on year, which does not result in a lower off year. So using GA does not increase alternate bearing in the trees. and then averaged across those 2 on and off years, you see that net increase overall. Keeping in mind you're applying this at bloom, so you're anticipating the effect on your setting crop, but you also have a developing crop on the tree, and the product has some effect on that developing crop as well. You do see a slight increase in fruit size of that developing fruit that you're going to be harvesting the year of application. It also delays the blackening of that fruit. So if you hang the fruit later into the season, you don't see the blackening as much that you normally do without causing the fruit to actually ripen. So you still maintain fruit quality, even though you're delaying that blackening. And then again, the effect on the setting crop, so the crop that's coming from the bloom you're applying to, you see an increase in yield and fruit size, and it stimulates leaf growth. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So you typically, with GA, you will tend to see more leafy inflorescences like you see there in the center of your screen at the bottom, as opposed to the leafless inflorescences that you see there on the right-hand side. So you get more leaf growth coming out to cover the fruit, prevent sunburn, and help you out that way. And so I think, yeah. So I'll take some questions right here if there are any, Ben, but before we do that, I just want to make some comments here about GA and about growth regulators in general. I started my career in ornamental horticulture, working in nurseries where growth regulators are probably overused, to be honest. They're used extensively. So I've experienced a lot with growth regulators. Growth regulators will not make a bad grower a good grower. They can take a bad grower and make you a lot worse, and they can become your worst enemy. You have to have, the basics right. You need to have your irrigation correct. You need to be fertilizing correctly. If your trees are severely debilitated by Phytophthora or salinity, GA is not going to fix those underlying issues. Again, I mentioned it several times. You have to have the potential there. You have to have something for the product to work with. So, if you've struggled in the past with getting irrigation right, with your fertilizer program, if you're just getting by, don't look at adding GA to the mix. It's not going to help you. Focus on the basics first, get that right, and then GA could be a tool to help you get that additional bump in yield that you need. And I'm sure there's probably going to be a question about cost, and I'll talk about cost in the next portion of the talk. So before I get there, Ben, are there any questions?
Yeah, you bet there are. Number one, does this accentuate alternate bearing? If you're getting a large crop one year, does that make the next year's crop less?
No, that's the beauty of it. It works better in an on year, but it does not increase or exacerbate alternate bearing. Carol never saw that in any of her trials that she did.
And in Santa Barbara, Jane Delahoyd says in Santa Barbara, they do allow the higher water rate
Thanks, Jane.
as in Ventura. Number three, is GA used in Mexico?
I don't know if GA is used in Mexico. Carol Lovett had a student, Samuel Salazar, who was a graduate student of hers. And he obviously Carol did a lot of growth regulator work, and he was involved in some of this work when Carol was doing these trials. And then when he returned to Mexico, he has done some trial work there with it. But I do not know if it's registered for use in Mexico and if they use it. We never heard it mentioned when we were there on the CAS trip in 2017. I never heard anybody mention the use of it. So unless it's been registered since then, I could find out and I can check with Valent and see if it's registered down there and if they use it.
Okay, this has come up. It's hard to gauge an orchard when it's in 50%. You're at the top of the hill and full bloom at the bottom of the hill. It's not even in bloom. It's on the north side, south.
Yep.
So how do you average it all to get a 50%?
That is the trick. You know, and that's where, you know, I wouldn't recommend if you're trying this for the first time, I don't recommend that you go out and spray your entire acreage.
Yeah.
You know, take a small portion that you can do a good assessment, you know, if that's a dozen trees, if it's, you know, 50 trees, you know, in an area that you can do a nice, good assessment of the stage of bloom, and do a test spray, you know, try it there, and try and get the feel for it. That is a big challenge. It's something I'll talk about in the next portion of the presentation. I hope we get that solved when we get the full label.
Yeah.
There really is no reason why we should not be able to get at least 2 applications per season on the label. There are no issues with MRLs with GA. Again, it's a natural product. The plant produces GA on its own. We're just supplementing it, and it's produced through a natural fermentation process. So we don't need to worry about MRLs or anything like that. There's virtually no risk of phytotoxicity with this product. We never saw any phytotoxic effects through all the years of trial work that Carol did. So I hope, you know, after the end of March 2023, when we move to a full label, that as part of that full label, we'll be able to get at least 2 applications, which will help with figuring out when do you apply it, you know, so you can kind of do an earlier application and a later one, and hopefully target, you know, most of the bloom at the right stage by doing that. But it's a challenge. I know, just, you know, on the small trial that we've been doing at Pine Tree, it's tough.
Okay, so yield and size of fruit is increased. The question came through, is size increased?
Yes. So.
Yep, that's what you said.
So, right here. So in addition to increasing the total poundage of fruit, you increase the pounds of fruit in the larger size pieces of fruit, 60s, 48s, 40s. So, and then when you look at it on a pieces of fruit, that's the bottom line here. When you look at it as pieces of fruit per tree, you also see that increase in the number of fruit per tree, as well as the number of fruit of 60s, 48s, and 40s.
And if it works best on an on year, would you recommend applying it every year, even though it would be an off year?
Yes, yes. You still see an effect in the off year. It's just not the same amplitude, because you don't have the same yield potential within the tree. So, you know, if let's just throw out some theoretical here. Okay. So right here we see, you know, 54% increase in pounds of fruit per tree. So if your tree, you know, in an off year has the potential to produce 10 pounds of fruit, we'll make the math easy, you're going to go to 15 pounds of fruit in the off year. But if you're in an on year and your tree has the potential to produce 100 pounds of fruit, you're going to move to 150 pounds of fruit. So it's not that it's not effective in the off year, but, you know, you can't take a tiny little crop and blow it up 1,000%. It's still going to be that small percentage, and you know, 50% of a small crop is still a small crop.
Yeah.
It's better than nothing, but it's just a mathematical thing.
So the question comes up, how old were the trees that Carol worked on? The comment is that it doesn't seem to work on young trees.
I would have to go back and look through the data to be certain. I think probably about 5 to 7 year old trees were the youngest that she used. So, you know, trees that were at least getting close to what we would consider mature production.
Um,
And you don't want to necessarily crop a young tree heavily. You want to grow your canopy in those first few years. So I don't know from a horticultural standpoint that I would really recommend you do this probably earlier than, 6 or 7 year old tree. You want to develop your canopy in those early years. So you have the potential to produce big crops.
Okay. Can you add Neutrophyte Phosphite?
Yes. I mean, there are no restrictions against doing that.
Okay.
I would do a jar test, make sure that's compatible. Again, if it's your first time doing that, I wouldn't spray your entire grove that way. I would, save that for a small portion just to make sure you don't see any ill effects. We just don't, the number of combinations of things that you could potentially be mixing with this, it's just not possible for us to do all those trials and have the answer for everything. So, that's where, kind of the survey, like in the next portion of the talk, things like that are important. It's important if you've done this and you've had experience and you've tried those mixes, let us know. Let us know that it was successful or, that it totally ruined something for you. Because that's the only way we're going to learn is through experience over time. Yeah. When you're trying to get a product registered, the worst thing you can do is start doing a lot of different mixes. You want a nice, clean data set to submit to EPA and DPR to get these registrations. And so, you can't possibly look at all those mixture combinations during the initial stage of getting products registered. So now that it's registered and we've got the label, I know growers are trying it. And I'll share some of that information in the next portion with you. So, do it on a small scale and test it and see.
Okay. Is there any effect on the skin? Does it get hardened using the?
No. Nope. We have seen no effects on other than, again, on your current crop that's on the tree when you make the bloom application, other than delaying the blackening of the peel on that maturing fruit. No effect on peel quality, peel texture, or ripening.
What about fruit chemical properties, carbohydrates, sugars?
Not that I'm aware of. I believe on some of this, Mary Lou may have done some post-harvest work with Carol. And again, there was nothing that Carol noted in any of her reports about anything post-harvest or anything like that.
And have you seen any effect on reeds or bacons, or is it only registered for Hass?
It is registered for avocados in California. All of the trial work was done with Hass. That's still our dominant cultivar, so that's where we focus the attention. If you've got some of those other varieties, I would suggest, again, doing a small trial. I probably would not recommend doing it on Gem. Gem already sets heavily enough. It's already a large size fruit. I don't think Gem needs the help, to be honest with you. I think you'd just be wasting money. But possibly some of the other varieties it could be helpful with.
Is there anything a homeowner can purchase?
Yeah. I mean, you can go. I was Googling this morning. You can go online and buy ProGib LV Plus online and use it. It's not a restricted use product. So, to my knowledge, yeah, I believe a homeowner could get it and use it.
So the question comes up, how would you use boron or urea in combination with gibberellic acid? You say one or the other, but
I would not use it in combination. It would be a one or the other. You're trying to achieve the same goal. You're trying to improve fruit set with all of those products by affecting flower quality. And so, you know, I would do one or the other. I wouldn't look at doing like a GA spray and following it up a week later with boron. I would just look at using one or the other.
And so what concentration would you use with the boron?
Oh, I'll answer that one in the written. I don't recall the rate. I have it, and maybe when Mary Lou starts talking, I'll go pull that up and I'll put it in the chat for people. I've got those rates. I just don't recall them off the top of my head. It's not very much for the boron.
No, it's not. Is it one application per season, per block, or per grove? One application per...
One application to any tree per year. So, you know, you can treat your different blocks at different times depending on the stage of bloom. So it's not one application per grove. It's, you know, it's one application per any given tree.
Okay. So that looks like it. You want to go into your survey?
Yep. Okay. So last year, so March of 2020, we sent out a survey to everybody who is on the CAC email list, which I think is like 4,000 and something people, to participate in a survey to tell us about your experience with GA since, you know, we received the registration at the end of March in 2018, which was a little bit late, but some people applied it in 2018, you know, and then more people applied it in 2019. And a number of people who responded to the survey had already applied it in March of 2020. So keep in mind the information I'm showing you, and when in a couple places it says next year, this year was 2020 when we did the survey. Next year, you know, was 2021. So just keep in mind, and I'll try to point that out as we go through. So the responses that we received totaled about 3,000 acres. The size of the growers ranged from 0.1 to 900 acres. If we throw out that 900 acre giant, the average size of the grove that responded was about 44 acres. So I'm going to walk through all the questions that we asked and go through the responses and kind of talk about what we understand from the growers. So the first question we asked was, have you applied ProGib LV Plus since we received the registration in the spring of 2018? And so about close to 90% of the people who responded said yes, they had tried it at some point in one of those 3 years that it was available. And you can see there from the individual year responses, you know, in 2018, again, we got it kind of late. So not quite 50% of people were able to get it on. And then by the time we got to 2020, at least of those who responded, we had about 95% of them said yes, they had applied it in 2020. So they'll be seeing the effects of that on the crop they're harvesting in 2021. So we might be sending out another follow-up survey to get some more data here coming up. I'm not certain of that yet. So if people said no, that they did not try ProGib LV Plus since the registration was available, they only got to answer one more question. And that was, why haven't you tried it? And so they had 6 responses to choose from, and other. On a number of these slides, you'll see that other was an optional response. If the respondent checked other, they were supposed to tell us what the other was. And I thought when I set the survey up in SurveyMonkey that it was a requirement that if you checked other, you had to type something in, but judging by the low number of written responses, I'm guessing I screwed that up. So anytime there's an other, you will see in the lower right corner, I have put in there verbatim what the respondents typed as their other response. So I tried to correct some spelling errors, but other than that, you see verbatim there what people told us other. So too expensive was the most common response. Not convinced of the benefits. No one said they couldn't figure out when to apply it, which was interesting because I hear a lot that, figuring out that exact stage of bloom is difficult. And yet no one said that figuring out when to apply it was the reason they hadn't used it. So I guess you just, people are just saying, hey, I'm going to try it, and I may be at the right stage, I may not, but I'm going to give it a go, I guess is what the answer is there. Too difficult to use, a few people said. No one said that, they couldn't find an applicator, which is good to hear. And a number of people said they weren't even aware that it was available. And then other, and the one written response to other was they were not sure if it was organic. So let me talk for a moment about too expensive. I just did a quick Google search this morning, and I could buy ProGib LV Plus a half-gallon bottle for right about $100. That's not going to a farm supply store. That's just some random vendor on the internet. So I'm guessing you can probably get it for a little bit under $100, at a reputable ag supply dealer. But let's go with the $100. A half a gallon at 12.5 ounces per acre is about 5.5 acres. So let's call it 5 acres. So that's $20 per product per acre. Figure in, application costs. You guys know what those are better than me. So, per acre, what are we looking at? Maybe, $100, 100 and a quarter per acre. You tell me. So if you get a 50% increase in fruit, is that worth $150? Well, if you're applying it in an off year and your yield potential is pretty small to begin with, a 50% increase maybe doesn't cover that cost. But if you're in an on year, and you can get a pretty good bump, then I think it covers the cost. So, but again, it goes back to what I said on that last slide of the previous section. A growth regulator is not going to take a bad grower and make you a good grower. If you're not irrigating properly, if you're not fertilizing properly, if you've got severe Phytophthora issues, if you've got major salinity issues that are limiting your yield, ProGib is not going to help you overcome those issues. You need to fix the bases first and have the yield potential for the product to work. So I'll get off that soapbox. Next question. So now we're into the questions for people. I'm sorry. This is also for the people who said no, they didn't use it. Do you plan to try using it in the future? So most of the people who said they've never used it said no, they don't plan to use it anytime in the future. No one said they plan to use it this year, which was 2020. Again, remember, we're conducting the survey in March of 2020. Some of those people, about 35%, said they planned to use it in 2021. So maybe later this year or sometime in 2022 would be a good time to do a follow-up and see after a couple more years where these responses go. Okay, so now we're going to move into the questions for the people who actually applied ProGib. So how did you apply it? This was, didn't really change from year to year. So, basically 2/3 of the people did an aerial application and about 1/3 of them did a ground application. So then we asked specifically for some more details on the ground application. So for ground applications, how many gallons per acre did you use? And they were given 4 options. They could say less than 100 gallons, 100 gallons, 100 to 200, or greater than 200. Other than a couple of people, which I'm not sure if they mischecked the box, that said they used less than 100 gallons for a ground application in 2020. Everybody followed the label and stuck with the 100 gallons, that at least, again, for people who responded to the survey. I believe more people have certainly tried GA than who responded to our survey. So this was the good one. Did you tank mix ProGib with anything else other than the recommended surfactant? And there's 20% of the folks out there who were brave enough to try it. That was pretty consistent from year to year. So what did you tank mix with? Boron and phosphites were the two most common. No one tried urea as a tank mix in the 3 previous years that we've had the product. And then in 2019 and 2020, other was checked, and what we got was just general micronutrients, so iron, zinc, manganese, etc. We did ask a follow-up then, if you did tank mix, did you see any negative effects of that tank mix? And the good news is no one said they saw any negative effects of the tank mixes. So, we shall see. I mean, obviously what a grower who's using this is doing isn't a controlled study, and they're really just doing it based on their yield, I assume. So, we will see how things come out with the trial that we're doing at Pine Tree, and whether we see any downsides of mixing with boron and urea. So application by county, Ventura has been the biggest county so far that's been trying it. And then, San Diego coming up in 19 and 20, and Santa Barbara as well. So good going, Jane. You're getting your growers to try it out. How many acres have been applied? So again, we broke it out and gave the respondents categories to respond to. And so if you're astute, you noticed that when at the beginning I said, our respondents said their size was anywhere from 0.1 acres to 900 acres. And you see here that there's no one in the less than 1 acre category. So you're saying, someone said they were 0.1 acres. Well, I assume that person was someone who hasn't tried it. And so they weren't responding to these questions. So I assume that's why the less than 1 has no responses. But generally, overall, relatively small growers, in the first couple, in the first year tried it, 5 to 10 acres. Looks like in 2019 and 20, decent size, 20 acre plus growers have been trying it. But a good mix, I think, of folks who are trying it. Did you leave any untreated trees for comparison? And this one, after that first year, the majority are saying no. So, I don't know if that means that you tried it in 2018 and you either saw good things or you didn't see any negative things, so you just went ahead and went for it since then. But if you've never applied GA, again, I don't recommend you go out and treat your entire orchard. Do a small block and learn how to use the product, and see what it can do for you before you go out and treat your whole orchard. Again, I don't think you're going to do any harm, but the worst case is you're just wasting money. So learn how to do it on a small portion of your grove and get a feel for it. So then we asked people to describe the yield effects that they saw. So again, we were asking this survey in March of 2020. So there was no yield effect to see from that 2020 application, because that's going to be the crop they're harvesting this year. So the 2018, what you see on here is for the application year. So they applied in 2018. So this is the effects they saw on the crop they harvested in 2019. And then 2019 is they applied in 19. And if they had harvested their crop last year when we did the survey, this is the response that they reported seeing. Good news is no one said they saw a yield decline. In 2018, over 65%-ish of the respondents said yield was the same. And then in 2019, the majority of people did see a yield increase. Again, how the individual respondents are judging that, I don't know. I'm assuming they're just looking at their reports back from the harvesters and the handlers and comparing that to their historical numbers. So specifically, what did they see in terms of the yield? No one saw a fruit size decrease. Kind of in 2018, more people said they saw a fruit size increase. In 2019, it was pretty much an even split. People that said fruit size was the same and fruit size increased. So were they satisfied with using ProGib? Overwhelming majority for both years said yes, they were satisfied with using it. For the few who weren't, we asked them why they were not satisfied. And this, again, we have another option. So the greatest reason was they didn't see a size increase. And respondents were able to select more than one of these responses. So they could say any of these responses. And so that's why you see 100% of respondents in 2019 said they didn't see a size increase of those who weren't satisfied. But there's also people responding that it was too difficult to know when to apply. And then other said the response was it was a poor set year and it's hard to evaluate. So again, you have to have something there for ProGib to work with. So if it's a poor set year, weather conditions, whatever, a lot of rain during bloom, the bees aren't out, they're not active. If it's a cold bloom, there's only so much that ProGib's going to be able to do to help you out in those situations. Okay, so we then asked which of the following, if any, were potential label changes that people would see as advantageous. So again, keeping in mind, we're under an SLN until 2023, and then come 2023, when we hopefully we should have a full label, we potentially can make some modifications. So the ability to tank mix was the greatest response. And again, there currently is no restriction on tank mixing. You are able to tank mix all you want. We just don't know how that's going to interact with the product and what the results are going to be. So it's not a recommendation, but you are allowed to tank mix. Timing and flexibility, about 50% of the folks who responded said that was an issue. And again, hopefully when we get the full label, we'll be able to have at least 2 applications during the bloom period so that we can hopefully cover the bloom better, and multiple applications there. You see that. Spray volume flexibility, again, for a ground application, currently, I think probably most of the ag commissioners will allow you to go to a higher volume than that 100 gallons. Outside of Ventura and Santa Barbara counties, you're just going to have to go and inquire with your ag commissioner about doing that. Availability of generics. Once we get the full label, we should then see some of the generics coming in and adding avocados to their labels. But until we move off the SLN, we're stuck with ProGib LV plus. And then other, and so you see down there the other comments. We did both ground and air, but couldn't put that on your survey. Would like to add fertilizers and phosphates, but we're told we couldn't. So again, that's tank mix. That's the blue bar there. So again, you can do it. Just be cautious. Just try it on a small percentage of your grove before you go all out with it. So with that, I am done. And I will answer any more questions if there's time, but I also just want to call your attention to some resources. So we've done a number of articles about ProGib. So if you go to CaliforniaAvocadoGrowers.com, go to publications at the menu at the top of the page, and from publications, select From the Grove, and then scroll down and you'll see every issue of From the Grove. So summer of 2018, spring of 2019, and summer of 2020 issues all have an article about ProGib. The summer 2020 article is all the data I just shared with you from the survey. And then there's some additional information that wasn't in From the Grove. It's stuff that was shared in the Green Sheet email newsletter. So if you just go to the search box in the upper right corner of the homepage of the commission, type in gibberellic acid, anything that's ever been sent out from the green sheet will come up when you do that search. So there's lots of information out there, and I think maybe there's some of the past presentations from Carol that she did for CAS that are probably on the CAS YouTube channel as well. So, and then if you don't have it, there's my current contact information if you want to reach out to me. So, any more questions, Ben?
Yes, there are some questions. Which works better, ground or air application?
So from all of Carol's data, they were both equally effective. If you can, but I mean, I will say the caveat there is they were not done on huge scales. Obviously, the aerial applications we had to do on a little bit larger scale than the ground applications, just because of the nature of having to fly it on. But we weren't talking about 10, 20 acre plots. Even for the aerial applications, we were sticking to one pass with the helicopter for a treatment. So that would be like a 3 rows or 4 rows, and however many feet long. So we were able in those trials to pretty well make sure we were at the right stage of bloom and all those other factors. So they both worked equally well at ground and an aerial application. For some growers, you're not gonna have a choice. You just can't do a ground application. And so aerial is going to have to be the way to go. For if you have the option and you can do a ground application and you're comfortable doing it and making sure you're getting that proper application made, I would go with ground myself, if I had the ability to do it. GA, it's not going to translocate very heavily within the plant. So you need to get it on the bloom. So you need to cover the canopy, but again, if the conditions are right, both of them are equally effective.
Okay. And you don't recommend applying it to gems, but do you know of anyone who has applied it to gems?
I have not heard of anyone who has applied it to gems.
And the final question before we take a little break is, you've talked about all the upside to this stuff. What about the downside? Are there health issues? Are there problems that we haven't discussed?
There's really not. It's a very safe product. There are no phytotoxicity issues. Even when Carol went up to very high rates, I mean, the recommended rate is 12.5 ounces per acre. I think she went up to like 75 ounces per acre or something. I mean, something ridiculous. We never saw phytotoxic effects. It's very safe. Honestly, the worst case is you're going to apply and not see any bump in yield, and you're going to have wasted the cost of that application. So I think that's the biggest risk, really, is just that, the timing isn't right or whatever, and you don't see an effect and you just spent the money for no reason.
Does ProGib help the trees withstand crazy windstorms? No.
No, right not.
Okay. Okay, so that's it. Why don't we take a 5-minute break, come back at 5 after 10, and we'll hear from Mary Lou Arpaia. So thank you very much, Tim.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
So Ben, I just put the boron and urea rates from Carol's work in the chat.
Yeah. So for those who want to apply boron, it's 1.25 pounds per acre of elemental boron, which is 6.3 pounds of solubor. And low biuret urea is 50 pounds per acre.
And those are the rates specifically for the bloom application.
Yeah. Here's a question that came through. I guess it's free speech. Is there any interaction between paclobutrazol and gibberellic acid?
Interaction between paclobutrazol and gibberellic acid. Well, no. If you over, well, I can tell you from my experience on hibiscus, growing them in containers for the florist industry, if you over treat with PAC, you can go in and jib them and get them to start growing again. No, they're anti. They work in opposites. So paclobutrazol, you're trying to stop growth. Gib, you're promoting growth. So, you know, if you apply both of them, you're just canceling each other out.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to go into Mary Lou's presentation. Take it away, Mary Lou.
So can you see that, Ben?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, great. Hello, everybody. I got a little bit of mixed signals of what I was supposed to talk about today, so it's sort of a potpourri. I'm going to talk a lot about varieties. I am going to talk about older varieties and segue into newer varieties. And then I will end up with a very short segment on flowering biology of avocados to put into perspective why I keep mentioning B and A flower types, because I'm fully aware that there are probably some people at this meeting that are not sure about what A and B flower types are. So I'll give a little refresher course at the very end of that to put that in perspective. So I've named this talk California Avocados Rediversifying Our Portfolio. I'm not a big investor in the stock market, but I do invest a little bit, and the stockbroker that I use is always telling me you need to be diversified rather than just have all your money in one assets. And I think that's a good way to look at where we are in the history of the California avocado industry, that maybe we need to be thinking about rediversifying our portfolio. So today, the California industry is dominated by a single variety, CAS. And just 1 second. I want to minimize the screen where everybody's picture is. I'll put it right down there. It's right there. And so what does that mean for the California grower? So I've been working on avocados, I hate to date myself, since 1983. And when I was hired in 1983, Hass was already the dominant variety, but it wasn't the dominant variety that it is now. It accounted for roughly 55, 60% of the total volume. Fuerte was the other main variety that we grew back then. So, but things were over 95% of the California industry is one variety. And what does that mean for the California avocado grower in this day and age? So I want to give you some context. The growth of domestic consumption of avocado when I was hired in 1983 was less than ½ pound per capita. It's now over 8 pounds per capita. So we've seen tremendous growth in avocado consumption. And I think from that perspective, focusing on a single variety from the mid-1970s to the 1980s, it allowed the California Avocado Commission really to do the pioneering work of the Ripe for Tonight program. That is really the driver behind this increase in consumption we've seen in the United States over time. We've helped in recent years by the perception, and I think it's a fact, that avocados are called by some a superfood. That has helped, but the California Avocado Commission, through their work on the Ripe for Tonight, laid the groundwork for this phenomenal success of avocados that we have today in 2021. But there was a lot of work done on that starting back in the 1970s. US consumption still has a tremendous opportunity for growth. We're at 8 pounds per person consumption. but there's other countries that are 12 and 15 and 20 pounds per capita, and we can still grow. California fruit is predominantly sold within the United States, and I've been told by several people growing avocados and marketing avocados that there is tremendous potential for export of fruit from the US. So we need to have a bigger supply of fruit. And the California market share of fruit sold in the US has dramatically shrunk. So when I was hired in 1983, California fruit dominated the market. We were in excess of 90% of the fruit marketed in the United States, although it was a smaller volume. The rest of the fruit came from Florida but now they're right around 20 to 25% of the total volume of the fruit sold. So, and our production has stayed fairly static over the last 30, 40 years. And we need to consider, do we want to grow as an industry? And do we want to grab back some of that market share? And how do we go about grabbing back market share? So I just have this slide in for historic perspective. The blue line is the spread of marketing of California avocados from 1983 to 1992 over the marketing year. Now by 83 and 92, during that period of time, Hass becomes the dominant variety. And by the end of 92, it's about 80% of everything that we market. So you can see that we're sort of spread out throughout the year. Now the red line is from 2018 data, when California fruit is marketed. And you can see that we're becoming squeezed during that marketing time. Now the good news is that we're actually marketing our Hass during its optimal maturity, and we're following actually the original patent of Hass, which said the fruit was best from about April through July. And so we're being squeezed. But basically, by being a single variety industry, we've put ourselves in a marketing straitjacket that we're only in the market for a relatively short period of time, and we're not in the market any longer, 12 months of the year. And so I think that there is opportunity there, and we need to have two other considerations I would like to lay out to you. One is that if you go to the USDA favor database, which is easily accessible if you go to USDA, you will find out, I went this morning and found out that there are 35 different countries that are allowed to ship avocados into the continental United States. Not just Mexico, Chile, Peru, and Colombia, but 35 countries. Most of these are Caribbean countries. They have limited access to the continental United States, but they're not shipping Hass. They're shipping West Indian varieties, and it's mainly going into the Eastern Seaboard. The point is that there is a market in the United States for things other than Hass. I think that's an important thing to consider. 35 countries shipping fruit. Most of those are Caribbean countries, and they're not shipping Hass into the United States. Another point is that the major importing sources, as you probably all know, is Mexico, Chile, Peru, and Colombia is growing in importance. Mexico, Peru, and Colombia are limited only to be able to send Hass into the United States. And it's likely that the other countries that are petitioning USDA to come into the United States will also be limited largely to Hass. The point here is this potentially gives us an opportunity to differentiate ourselves and regain a 12-month presence in the US market. Think about that. We know from just the favor database, you can assume that we're sending other things besides Hass into the US, is finding a market. And also we have this mountain of Hass fruit. And even though Hass is a super wonderful variety, we have the opportunity to differentiate ourselves and regain market share. So what can we do? I would say we need to reconsider rediversifying our portfolio. We already have the genetics in California. We don't have to go searching the world for new varieties. We have it already here by and large in California. Now, the caveat is that this would take buy-in, not only from the grower community, but from packers and our marketing associations, so that we can make an effort to become a diversified industry once again. So diversification would provide an opportunity to provide the US consumer with choice that only we, California, can provide. Because these other countries that are importing fruit into the US, guess what? They're limited to halves. It potentially would expand where we can grow avocados in California, and we can maybe rediscover the San Joaquin Valley where costs of production are lower, number one. And number two, the San Joaquin Valley is an earlier production zone. And so that could actually expand our market window into the US avocado market. And it provides us an opportunity by re-looking at different genetics to increase productivity per acre and to look at varieties that may be better adapted to environmental stress. So I want first to put this in a little bit more perspective. Let's step back in time and look at how avocados became part of the California landscape. So Californians have been here since 1856, 170 years. And in the 1870s, we actually had the very first trees planted in Ventura and Santa Barbara counties. In 1908, we have the first commercial grove that's actually planted. And in 1911, we have the very two important things. The first budded tree, because up until that time, everything was seedlings. And in 1911, we have the Forte avocado introduced into California from Mexico. Now, the other seminal thing is that in 1915, we have the first California Avocado Society. It's called the California Avocado Growers Association at that point in time. And Wilson Popenoe gives a talk, and he already describes 86 varieties. Now, I'm not up here to tell you that we need 86 commercial varieties, but it just shows that we have the genetics already here in California. So the California industry in the 19 teens and the early 1920s was a very active industry. And there were a lot of trips down into Mexico and Guatemala looking for new material. There's a lot of people planting seeds out there. And we actually have a lot of that old materials here in California. So we have the genetics in California to continue to be a leader in new varietal development. We also have a legacy present in backyard trees. And this is a picture of a tree. Actually, this tree is in Oakland, California. I went and saw this tree and collected budwood, and you can see what a beautiful fruit that is. And there was a lot of fruit on the tree. In fact, this person, it was like being a psychologist to this owner. They were concerned the tree just was overwhelming them with the amount of fruit falling down onto the ground. There was no way that they could consume all the fruit. And so we have this variety now in our variety collection, and we're hoping to put it out in trial in the future to see if it actually can fit from a commercial perspective. So I want to go through then some of the older varieties we have, the genetics. So you can see in this slide, with the exception of the Forte, which came from Jalisco, Mexico, all this material, these named varieties, originated in California. I mentioned the Lion. The Lion by no means is a commercial variety these days, but it's purported to be the mother of Hass. We're trying to figure that out from a genetics perspective, but it's purported to be the mother of Hass. The other thing is you can see that the Hass was actually patented. It is one of the very first avocado varieties to be patented, and it's actually one of the very first US plant patents. So that's sort of interesting. We have Zutano, Edernal, and Bacon varieties that we still use as pollinizer varieties, originating, you can see, in the 1920s. So they're still around with us. They're all almost 100 years old. So the global industry has been dominated by two varieties that arose over approximately 100 years ago. Forte in 1911 introduced into California, and the Hass, which is a seedling that was planted in 1926. Just want to show you the original parent tree, Fuerte in Jalisco, Mexico. And they just now in Mexico celebrated the Fuerte avocado and have replanted a Fuerte avocado next to the California Avocado Society plaque that was placed in Jalisco, Mexico back in the I believe the 1950s. So Fuerte was our leading variety for many years. You can see 50 years. It was adapted, felt to be adapted to a wide variety of climates, especially very cold hardy. And it was known for its very high fruit quality. But the Achilles heel of the Fuerte was that it was recognized to have erratic or very severe alternate bearing. And if you go into the old California Avocado Society yearbooks, that's a big complaint about the Fuerte. So we have the Rhiza Hass, a seedling planted in 1926, patented in 1935, and it was recognized early on for its very, very high fruit quality. It was not, and it was also, now we sit around and we talk about alternate bearing of Hass and how horrible alternate bearing of Hass is. But back in the 1930s and 40s, it was considered to be a gigantic improvement over Fuerte. Think about that one. And, but its major Achilles heel at the time was that the Fuerte was number one. It's a green skin fruit, and the black skin of the Hass, when it was ripe, was considered to be a serious disadvantage. And in fact, if you go back to the old Avocado Society yearbooks from the early 1920s, there is a lot of talk about black fruit is inferior because you can't tell when the fruit is bad, because the black skin hides defects. Now we consider that a plus these days. So you know the Hass avocado is wonderful because it turns black when it's ripe, and it hides all these surface defects that occur when we handle the fruit. So times change, but we need to be open. I think it tells us we need to be open-minded. Now, other varieties that came out besides the Zutano and the Bacon, here are just pictures of the fruit. And I'll remind you, these are all green skin fruit. And these three varieties are bee flower types. So they can be used as a pollinizer for Hass and other A flower types. And they all originated before 1940. Now, between 1940 and 1980, we still had quite a bit of activity of people looking for new varieties. And here are 4 varieties that are still around today that are grown. One is the Edinger. It's a bee flower type. It originated in Israel and was brought into the United States and into California very early on in the early 1950s. The reed was a seedling that originated in Carlsbad. And you can see it was patented in 1967, seedling year in 1948. So you can see how long it does take to bring things to commercial production. But the reed now enjoys a niche market within and there are growers that are making quite a bit of money growing reed. Charles was a variety that originated in Australia. It's grown in Hawaii now, and we have some trees here in California. No commercial acreage that I know of, but is used by some people as a pollinizer since it's a bee flower type. And then we have Pinkerton. When I was hired in 1983, we actually had Pinkerton acreage, and the Pinkerton was grown both in the San Joaquin Valley and throughout Southern California. And again, a niche market variety. And these are just pictures of the variety. The problem with the Pinkerton, you can see it can be a necky fruit, especially when it's grown in hot climates like the San Joaquin Valley. So now we're going to talk about varieties that were released from 1980 on, and all of the varieties that have been released within California came from the breeding program of Dr. Bob Berg. And so Bob Berg has made a great contribution to the California avocado industry. And I always like to bring this up because Bob's not only a wonderful person, just having celebrated his 95th birthday, but he made major contributions to the world of the avocados. So these are varieties that all arose from Bob Berg's breeding program. The Gwen, the Witzel, and Esther were released, you can see, in the early 1980s. And the Gwen is the main variety of those three. The Witzel is a bee flower type. That's what that little red star stands for. And then on the shoulders of the Gwen, we have three seedlings of Gwen that have gone on to be commercial varieties. And that is a Lambhass, Gem, and Harvest. The Surprise is a seedling of another variety, but it also arose out of the Berg breeding program. So Dr. Berg retired in 1992, and the Lambhass was released under Gray Martin and Guy Whitney in 1995. I took over the breeding program in 1996. And I'm responsible for the release of the Gem and the Harvest. I want to go back to the Gwen a little bit because it arose from Berg's breeding program when he was looking and asked by the California industry to breed a green skin Hass. So everybody was saying, the Hass is a wonderful fruit. Its season augments fuerte. It has less alternate bearing, et cetera, but its default is that it has a black skin. So we want a green skin Hass. And the Gwen is Dr. Berg's response to that challenge. But he also gave us something else. He gave us a smaller tree than Hass. He gave us a variety that has less alternate bearing than Hass. But he gave us a variety that's very similar in season and somewhat similar in appearance to Hass. But he gave us something else that's even better. He gave us a variety that is a wonderful breeding parent for future varieties of avocado. So now remember, I told you in the 1940s the industry was not too keen on Hass because of its black color. When Bob Berg, unfortunately, by the time this thing was released, it's the mid-1980s, Hass is already the #1 variety. And you see Bob Berg and Gray Martin writing in the late 80s, you know, a drawback of the green Gwen is the fact that it's green and not black and not preferred any longer. So another food for thought. So the progeny of Gwen I mentioned, Lambhass is released in 1996, and it's a seedling of Gwen out of the Berg program. And then in 2003, we've released the Gem and the Harvest. The Harvest is not that well adapted to California. It seems to do better in other environments, and it has very severe alternate bearing, but it's an interesting variety from the perspective that it's very, very late. And that's one reason Gray Martin actually named it the Harvest, because it is very, very late. But I want to spend a few minutes talking about the Lambhass and Gem, because we do have acreage of these, and I think this is two varieties that we, Lambhass maybe needs to be reconsidered, and the Gem definitely has a lot of interest now for good reason. So the Lambhass, this is a picture of the two, Lambhass and Hass together, and you can see they look similar, but they look different. The Lambhass tends to be a more square fruit. You can see that the stem end is very square up on the top, and it tends to be more square down on the bottom, not quite as necky as the Hass. The Lambhass also is a much later maturing fruit. You have no business picking Lambhass before July. I would not even pick it until August. It's better eating in August. So It is not a substitute for HAS. It's a supplement to the HAS season, because by the time that it comes into production, it is late in the summer. The other nice thing about the lamb HAS, and I'll come back to this a little bit later, has a very upright growth habit and has very flexible wood. And that is a very important trait when we come and talk about another new variety that is on the marketplace. We know that lamb HAS is more tolerant to persea mite. And we also know that lamb HAS has a higher rate of photosynthesis than HAS. Now, one problem with lamb HAS is that it does tend to alternate bear. And when the trees are young, it can almost kill itself by overproduction. So we have to think about ways to make alternate bearing a little bit less with lamb HAS. This just shows you the difference between the two. HAS on the left and lamb HAS on the right. These trees are the same age, and this picture was taken down in Duluth when the trees were about 5 years old. I want to move on to Jum. Jum is similar again to HAS. It's a more roundish fruit, although it's more, I would say, teardrop than HAS. Its maturity season overlaps HAS. It's slightly later than HAS. It could be a substitute for HAS, or it could just augment or be a supplement to HAS. It can accumulate very high levels of dry matter. We've measured over 40% dry matter in Jum late in the season. To me, the fruit's too oily then, but other people really like it. We've just concluded and published results. The Jum avocado actually has much higher oleic acid in the oil of its oil than compared to HAS. What that means for health fanatics, I'm not sure, but there is a difference between the oil composition between HAS and Jum. Jum, like Gwen, it's very similar to Gwen. It's vase-like and compact. It also has flexible wood. It also bears its fruit on the inside of the tree, similar to Gwen. The jury's still out about pest tolerance. And there is some indication, I've been told in Ventura County, that people believe that it's more susceptible to wind scarring. That could be because the fruit are borne in clusters rather than in single fruit, more like HAS. So this is just a picture of the yield potential of Jum, and a picture of a tree that's taken down in Irvine. This tree was top worked onto a 4/8 stump, and at the time that this picture was taken, it's about 12 years old. So I want to give you some data that we collected now. This is old data, but it's still very valid. This is on top work trees at the UC South Coast Irvine. So we have HAS, lamb HAS, and Jum here. And you can see over that period of time that the Jum and the lamb HAS outproduced on a kilogram per tree basis than HAS. I want you to note that in the middle bar, which is lamb HAS, you can see that there is alternate bearing going on in the lamb HAS, but I would say is irregular bearing. But the Jum is much more constant in its bearing habit. If we calculate a thing called the alternate bearing index, what you see is the lower the number, the better. So a score of 0 would be no alternate bearing whatsoever, and a score of 1 is complete alternate bearing. So I'm not going to tell you that the Jum does not alternate bear. I'm going to tell you that it has less alternate bearing than either lamb HAS or HAS. Good news for that. This is average fruit size. And you can see here that the Jum and the HAS, the Jum makes a slightly larger fruit, which I think Ben alluded to earlier, and Tim alluded to when we were talking about should we use Jum on it. But the lamb HAS tends to have even larger fruit than the Jum. I want to show you some more recent data. This is data taken from a trial that we have at the Lloyd Butler Ranch in Ventura County, where we have 5 varieties: Carmen, Jum, HAS, lamb HAS, and Reed. And this is a change in the canopy volume, or the size of the tree, from 2013 through 2019. And what you can see is that in this trial, the Hass is the largest tree, and the reed and the gem are the smallest trees, and lamb Hass is intermediate. Okay, now we're going to look at yield. And this is important because we need to think more beyond yield per tree. We need to look at yield efficiency. So on the left side of the tree, we have the yield. This is kilograms of fruit per tree. And if we look at that, then you would say, wow, you know, the Hass is outproducing gem, and the lamb Hass is slightly outproducing the Hass. But if we look at the fact that we go back to this slide and we actually have gem and reed are smaller trees, if we look at the yield efficiency, how much fruit per cubic meter of tree we have, we see here that the gem beats everything. The gem and the Hass has the lowest yield efficiency. So what this tells you that if you have a smaller tree, you can put more trees per acre, and we're going to boost overall productivity. And so we need to look at not so much pounds of fruit per tree, we need to look at how efficient is the tree in producing that fruit. So other varieties that are in the marketplace these days, they're all Hass-like. And it's actually, though, pretty exciting because although they're Hass-like, they offer something different than Hass. So the first one is Carmen Hass. It originated in Michoacan, Mexico. Is patented in the United States, and the master licensee for the variety is Brokaw Nursery. This you'll be able to look at. It's a more spreading tree than Hass. Is noted, what makes Carmen really sort of unique is this sort of its ever blooming characteristic down in Mexico, and in California we have a very strong bloom in the fall. It has some interesting growth habit. I'll show you pictures of that. And the fruit is basically indistinguishable from Hass. We have some data that we've collected that the spring bloom of Carmen may be slightly earlier in maturation than Hass. But this may be due to the fact that it has a very extended bloom. So the tree shape. On the left is a Hass tree. That's a typical Hass tree. You can see that it's irregular in shape. This is the Carmen Hass tree, and this is very typical of Carmen, that the top of the tree is relatively flat. It's mainly due to what we call sympodial growth, where this is the apex of the fruit, the tree of a growing shoot, but that shoot is actually repressed, and you get axillary branching. And that slowly then gives rise to this sort of flat spreading tree shape. Another characteristic of the Carmen in the fall, the summer flush, is this bud swelling that you see here. The stem is actually swelling during the growth, and these are now that fall bloom coming on. And you can see that the other thing is that the wood of the summer flush is very, very stiff. It's like taking a pencil and trying to break a pencil is very stiff. And so that gives rise to this very unique growth habit of the Carmen. Two additional Hass bud mutations, because the Carmen is believed to be a bud mutation of Hass. Two additional bud mutations of Hass that originated in Chile are the Flavia and the Eugenin. These are both in California. I brought them from Chile about 20 years ago. They've sort of languished in the breeding program. They belong, and just recently now, these two varieties now have found a home in California through Avocado Nursery, and they will be available in limited supply. What differentiates these two from CAS? The trees look very much like CAS. The fruit you can see look very much like CAS. The thing is that these varieties in Irvine are 2 to 3 months earlier than CAS in terms of fruit maturation. Now, is it dry matter? No, it's eating quality. These fruit are good to go much before CAS. And actually, you cannot hold the fruit on the tree into the summer. By the time that April rolls around, these fruit are actually over mature. But you can see they can offer a potential for California growers to extend our CAS-like season for the US market and put us into the marketplace earlier with a high good eating quality fruit. We've done limited taste panel work with these two varieties, and they test very well when we put it out to in consumer panels. Now, this variety is not in California, but is gaining attention in Mexico, the Flor de Maria. And I only mention it here because we're trying to bring it in to introduce to see how it does in California. But you can see that it looks like it has higher productivity than CAS, but it's another bud mutation of CAS. Now, another variety that is in California, it is not a bud mutation of CAS, it's actually a seedling tree, is the Maluma CAS. And this variety originates from South Africa. I've been to South Africa, I've seen this variety, and I believe that this variety needs to be really tested here in California and has a potential to expand the environmental adaptability of the variety within California. The first time that I saw the Maluma, I thought I was seeing a lamb Hass tree. It has a very similar growth habit to lamb Hass, and it has the flexible wood that the lamb Hass has. And I'll get to why that is important in just a slide or two. So the Maluma Hass originated in South Africa. It was patented in the United States in 2010. Brokaw Nursery worked with Alice Beste Nursery, Andre Ernst, and brought it in, and it was released from quarantine in 2019. So there is a limited amount of budwood available through Brokaw Nursery at this point in time. My understanding from talking to Andre Ernst is that he is willing to license other nurseries here in California to also grow the variety. So it's an upright tree similar to lamb Hass. It is slightly earlier than Hass, but generally the same season. And that is data coming out of South Africa and also from other countries that are producing it like Peru. Minimum dry weight in South Africa is 20%. And to me, one of the exciting things about the Maluma is this next point. It's adaptability to high density planting and trellising. It also, at least from what I've observed and the data that's been collected in South Africa, to be higher yielding than Hass and actually more tolerant to environmental stress than Hass, is specifically high temperature. So this is a slide that was provided to me by Andre Ernst about what they think that they can do with Maluma. And you can see that they believe that they can put in very high densities of Maluma per acre. So if you take that 800 trees per hectare, divide that by 2.5, and you come out with somewhere about 300 to 400 trees per acre. And this to me is the exciting thing. This is actual pictures from South Africa with Alice Beste Nursery with their trials with trellising. And you can trellis the Maluma because of its flexible wood. And that means that potentially we could trellis a lamb Hass, and we can trellis some of the newer variety, potentially trellis Gem, although Gem has a stiffer wood, but we have new varieties coming forward from the UC breeding program that has flexible wood similar to the Maluma, which leaves open the idea that we could grow these varieties under very high density in a trellis situation. To me, that's exciting because when we go to trellis, we can control productivity and we can enhance productivity if we get it right. So is there life beyond Hass or Maluma or Gem or anything else that we currently have? And I would say, yes, there is. And going back to Hass, and this is anything else that we could come up with, every variety, we're going to discover faults with it, and we'll always need to be improving what we have. But with Hass, which accounts for 95% of our current acreage, we have tree size and structure. We have bearing habit because the fruit are born on the outside of the tree, so we can get sun burning and wind scarring, alternate bearing, stress tolerance. It's very susceptible to Persea mite. And we need to enhance our productivity. We need, as an industry, to be averaging 15 to 20,000 pounds per acre year in and year out, and maybe even higher. And finally, it's dangerous to have an industry that's based on one variety, because if we get a disease or a pest that the Hass is very susceptible to, that potentially is the end of the California avocado industry. So we need to go from having huge trees to high density. We need to improve our production efficiency. Remember the slide I showed you from Jim Lloyd Butler. We need to look at not how many pounds per tree, but yield efficiency of the trees. And we also need to be looking at stress tolerant and finding trees that can tolerate salinity and high heat and cold. And post-harvest, we also need to be thinking the Hass sets a very high, I like to think gold or platinum or diamond standard for post-harvest handling of fruit. But even the Hass can have problems post-harvest. And so we need to always be thinking, can we improve the post-harvest quality of our fruit? So finding new varieties, how difficult is it? I've talked to you before about this. Is a very long process, 15 to 20 years from seed planting the seed to commercialization. Avocados are very difficult. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. For every 1,000 seed you plant, maybe you'll get 3 or 4 selections that are worth going forward with. And trying to meld horticultural traits with fruit quality traits is very, very challenging. So the breeding objectives for the UC breeding program is we want to expand environmental adaptability, increase stress tolerance. We want to have varieties that you can have high yields within 3 or 4 years of planting the trees with lower alternate bearing, even hopefully better than Gem, but with high yields, because you can have low alternate bearing with no crop or very little crop. We want high productivity and we want low alternate bearing. We want to come up with upright, slender trees that are adaptable to high density plantings or potentially to trellising and manipulation in that way. But we also need a high quality fruit and good post-harvest life. So we're trying to meld both what the grower needs, which is enhanced productivity and production efficiency, with what the consumer wants. We want to grow US consumption and we want to grow consumption of California produced fruit. So we need to have happy consumers and increased production. So the future is a one endless bowl of guacamole, and I actually believe for many more years it will be. And we've announced this last year in June when we talked, but I can expand upon it a little bit more. The University of California, Riverside has partnered with Green Motion, which is part of Eurosemias, which is a company based in Spain. And they've entered into a partnership to sponsor both the variety and rootstock programs at UC Riverside. For the variety program, we're hoping to release 4 new varieties within the next 2 years. And this, in California and the United States, this is going to be through Green Motion's USA partner, Avotopia. So if you think that you're even remotely interested in trying some of these new varieties, you can contact Avocado. As of this morning, the material transfer agreement was signed, I'm happy to say, between Green Motion and the University of California. So we can provide material to Avocado, which can go into agreements if anybody's interested in trying some of these new varieties or even the new rootstocks coming out of Dr. Monsalva's program. So we have material that can hopefully expand our market coverage, improve tree architecture, material that is precocious, and material that I believe have greater yield efficiency. So we have these 4 varieties for the near future. We have UCR V03. You can see it's a smaller round fruit. It's an early season fruit. Seasonality appears based on data we've collected in Irvine from approximately late November into February. UCR V02 is another earlier variety. Again, similar seasonality to 03, but you can see it's a larger fruit and a smaller seed. On the back end, we have UCR V04. It's a mid-season fruit. Its distinguishing factor is the fact that it is a B flower type. And then UCR V01. When I made this slide, we thought it was only a late season fruit. We now have some preliminary data this year. Its seasonality may go from about January into August or September. So we're exploring that a little bit further beginning this year with funding that we have received from Green Motion. I just want to show you some pictures. This is UCR V01. The later season fruit, you can see the kind of crop load that it can put on. It has very flexible wood, something that potentially we can try on trellis in high density. Smaller tree than house. This is UCR V02. This is an earlier variety. Again, flexible wood. This variety tends to have less alternate bearing and can bear large amounts of fruit. Again, a candidate for high density with trellising. UCR V03 is more Hass-like in its tree structure. It has a smaller fruit, earlier season, and we think this is potential for niche marketing. This is UCR V04, and you can see it has a very upright growth habit. Again, a weepy, willowy wood. This one would be very adaptable to a high density, high and trellising, and this is a B flower type. And then this one is not on the list. I'm really excited about this one. This one is UCR V08. This one is very, very early. You can pick it and eat it in mid-October in Irvine. Now, it's an A flower type. Now, one problem potentially is it's a green skin fruit. This fruit in fruit quality rivals Forte in eating quality. It is unbelievable. And I'm not being biased. I've given a lot of this fruit away, and everybody comes back and says, when can I get some more of this fruit? And so we're really, really excited about this particular selection for the future. How about flowering? So this is data that we've collected at Irvine predominantly, but some data was collected in Ventura County over multiple years for each variety. And you can see that they're all flowering about the same amount of time. Gem tends to be a little bit later in flowering. The darker the circle, the more intense the flowering. Carmen, you can see here, flowers over a very long period of time. Here's Flavia and Eugenin, those Hass mutations from Chile. Here's Hass, and then here's UCR 01, 02, and 03. And then here's 04, which is a B flower type. And so what we know from this data is that we can use this one. It has a long flowering season. It can potentially be used as a pollinizer variety for these other varieties, in addition to Zutano, Bacon, Edinger, Edrenol, Charwell, Surprise, which are all bee flower types, which we have available already in California. So where can you obtain the proprietary material that I've mentioned? So for Carmen Haas and Maluma, that would be Brokaw Nursery, although Carmen Haas is available from other nurseries through a sub-license from Brokaw. And as I mentioned, it's my understanding that Alice Besting Nursery will be providing Maluma to other nurseries here in California as the need arises. But currently, if you want to get this material, Brokaw would be the place to go. For Flavia, Eugenin, and the UC material right now, the source of material would be Avotopia. So I've put the websites for both these nurseries here so that you can explore it and contact them if you're interested in this material. And so this is just Rodrigo Iturrita on the right and Eric Filk on the left. These are the people that I am working with on the varietal development, especially Eric. Eric is our go-to person and really has done the lion's amount of work in collecting the data that we currently have to share with you. So I just want to end with a quick, very quick thing about avocado flower behavior. We could give another hour lecture on this. So avocados are sort of unique in the fact that they have, within the same flower, they have two phases of avocado flowering. So the flowers open first and they're female when they open. And that is shown here. This is the pistil of the flower. The flower then will close and the flower reopens and it opens up as in the male phase. Okay, so this is called, from a technical perspective, synchronous dichotomy. Dichotomy means it's synchronous because it goes from one phase to the next, and that is in the same flower. And so this is just a diagram again to show you that the avocado flowers have everything it needs to take to make a fruit. It can produce, but it looks different in cross section. So here is the female flower in a stylized manner. This is the ovary and the stigma where the pollen lands, and this is what becomes the fruit. In the second phase of flowering, these stamens, which produce the pollen, change. They actually grow. The pollen matures during when the flower is closed, and then the pollen is released. So this is another more accurate picture. If you got a little hand lens and you went out and looked at your avocado flowers, this is how it looks in the female phase, and this is how it looks in the male phase. So it's important to consider the fact that the stamens have these little like trap doors, pollen. And when the flower enters the male phase, these trap doors open and the pollen is actually released from these pollen sacs. Okay, so this is not a pollen grain. These flaps open and then you have these little tiny pollen grains are released. And then they are what land on the stigma to affect pollination and fertilization. And this is the ovule which will give rise to the fruit. So because we have the synchronous dichotomy, we also have, now I've talked about A and B flower types in this talk. So A flower type, typically, depending on the weather, but typically the A flower type, the flowers open in the morning as female. Then the flowers close, and they're closed all afternoon, all the following morning, and the following afternoon on the second day, they will be open and they'll be male. Conversely, on the B flower type, so that's Zutano, Bacon, Edinger, Fuerte, UCRV04, they open up and they're female in the afternoon, and they close in the evening, and then the following morning, they're open up as male and they shed the pollen. And so when we talk about A and B flower types, because these are you need to have pollen to make fruit, typically what we like to recommend is that we have some of the B flower types in groves that are planted with A flower types. So Hass is an A flower type. Lamb Hass and Gem are all A flower types. And we would recommend that you need to have some trees on this list in your grove to provide the pollen when this is female, because typically you don't have pollen from the Hass. Now, during this midpoint of the day, you can get some overlap where there'll be some male flowers open and some female flowers open, but you don't want to rely only on about 45 minutes per day to have overlap in the flowers. So that's why we talk about A and B flower types, and why it's important to have a mix of those in your grove, so that the B flower types produce pollen for the A flower types. And that's why, in my mind, Charwell is a good alternative, because it's a very high green skin, very high quality eating fruit. Surprise is a good eating fruit. And UCR's V04 is another variety now that is a Hass-like fruit. It turns black when it ripens, and it is a B flower type. So just finally, do you need something to move pollen between the flowers? So you need the B flower type to complement the A flower type, vice versa. There is some suggestion in the literature that you can rely on wind pollination. That was done by our colleague, Tom Davenport from the University of Florida. But if you look at his last publication, he states that you need wind velocities of 20 miles per hour or greater consistently for wind pollination to be effective. Now, we don't have consistent 20-mile-per-hour winds all day long during bloom. So we need something else to carry the pollen from one flower to the next. And so the main pollinator that we would use is the honeybee. Now, there's a lot of work looking at alternatives to honeybees. The bumblebee, a lot of work's been done with bumblebees in Israel. Bumblebees are a good augmentation to the honeybee, and you actually can augment the effectiveness of moving pollen around by also introducing bumblebees. So I just want to end with the thought that you have to have A and B flower types, especially if you are in hotter, drier climates, so trees have less overlap. And you need something to move the pollen around. So you do need to have honeybees in your grove. When I first was hired in 1983, there were a lot of wild feral bees in California. A lot of people didn't put hives in their orchards. But we've had a varroa mite and tracheal mite and a lot of other things that have wiped out the wild bee populations. So we need to consider about putting in honeybees actually into our groves. So I want to thank you for your attention. A lot of what I talked about can be found in the California Avocado Society yearbooks, and all this information, the bulk of it, you can find on avocadosource.com, and I would urge you to go and look at that. And I want to thank Alejandro Barrientos for giving me the slide about Florida Maria, and Andre Ernst for sharing information about the Maluma. Thank you very much. And I don't know, Ben, if we have time for questions.
Yeah. Let's ask some questions. What about climate change? Are you seeing changes in flowering? And the comment was made that in Carpinteria, Carmen flowers all the time, constantly, and it makes it a real problem for pest control because you know it's hard to spray.
Yeah, I think that's a weak point of Carmen, is that it flowers all the time, and how do you target your pest sprays? But in regard to climate change, yes, definitely. And Irvine, we're seeing fruit not hang on the trees as long as it used to. We're seeing fruit drop a lot earlier than we used to. We're seeing dry matter accumulate a little bit faster, but the main thing is the fruit doesn't hang on the trees. I think we need to be looking at ways to get around climate change. I have a trial up here in the San Joaquin Valley looking at growing avocados under net, and that definitely modifies things. We're just getting into that. Peggy Mock and I have a specialty crop grant where we're going to be looking at that some more here in the San Joaquin Valley, looking at ways to move around the high heat aspects and the low temperature aspects. So we're going to know a lot more. But yeah, climate change is a big deal. It's a big deal. And we are seeing changes in our research plots that we've had established for many years. We're seeing changes in how the tree perform.
Yeah. So building on the comments that Tim was making about using gibberellic acid, grower says they just sprayed gib on Carmen. Is that a good idea? Would that change the bearing habits? Would that shift it to a better time?
It's an excellent question. GA3, and Tim can probably talk about this more than I can affects more than just flowering. It affects a lot of different things. And depending on when you spray it, you're going to have a different effect. I can remember Hank Brokaw telling me that Gwen in the nursery wanted to flower. So what did he do? He sprayed his Gwen trees at the nursery with gib to not get them to flower. So you have to be very, very careful. If I was going to spray Carmen with gib, I would only target the bloom where I want the fruit.
Yeah. So what would be the most potent bee flower type? What's the best?
I would say you need a mix.
Yep.
A mix of pollinizers, because crop load effect, these pollinizer varieties are setting fruit and having a crop of their own, and they have their own alternate bearing on and off cycles. And we know that when you carry a heavy crop, we normally delay bloom a little bit. And so if if you have a heavy crop on your pollinizer, it may bloom a little bit later. So I've seen that both at the trial we had at the Thornhill Ranch, where we followed bloom, and also at Farm ACW down in Duluth, that any given year, I didn't put that slide in, but any given year, the bloom moves around a little bit. So if you could, under an ideal situation, I would put more than one pollinizer in, just so that it's like an insurance policy that you always are going to have bloom when your main variety that you're interested in is blooming.
Okay, so you're a new grower. Which main varieties should you be planting?
And you mean a new grower that bought an old grove, or a new grower that's putting in a new grove?
Ready to go. So what should I plant?
I would plant a mix of varieties. I would, first of all, I would decide who I'm going to market my fruit with, and go and talk to them about how committed they are to helping you market stuff other than CAS. That's a big thing. But I think as an industry, we're getting that, that critical mass of gem growers, where the gem growers are going to be able to say, we need to market this fruit, and we need to do it in a concerted manner. We need to promote the gem as a gem. And, the lamb has have a little bit of a problem, because sometimes it was melded in with CAS, at least at the retail level, that people didn't differentiate it. We need to begin to differentiate these other varieties. But I would try gem. Gem up here in the San Joaquin Valley actually is doing quite well. It seems to be more heat tolerant than CAS. I definitely would try Gem. I would try Lamb-Hass. I would grow Reed. I would grow Hass. I think, Hass has definitely a place, but I would try other varieties. And then as a pollinizer, Charwell is a spreading tree. So maybe Charwell would make a good pollinizer variety for Hass. Azutano, Edinger, and Bacon are more upright trees. So if you're growing, and they respond very well to pruning, you can hack the tree off. And so, maybe they might be better pollinizers for Gem, because you're going to probably grow Gem under a higher density, more compact tree. And so the Gem those might be better for Gem in the short run. I think as UCR V04 becomes available, that is definitely a candidate for a pollinizer for Gem, because it's a slender upright tree. So there are choices out there. It depends on your planting density and what you really want to do and how much risk you want to take.
Well, can consumers distinguish between Gem, Harvest, Lamb-Hass, Marble, Hass? Is the consumer out there knowledgeable enough to make these distinctions?
Can a consumer differentiate between a Gala and a Jazz and an Empire Apple?
I can.
Consumer differentiate between red leaf lettuce, romaine, and green leaf? Can a consumer differentiate between a Vidalia onion and a regular onion? Those look identical.
Mm-hmm.
I would posture that we don't want to go out to the mass marketing with some of these varieties early. We need to build our base, and you do that by niche marketing, going to the Whole Foods of the world, potentially working with retailers that are committed to having special marketing programs. But I think, yes, I think that we can do this. I think when we've done our taste panels down at Riverside, we did it for 4 years, once a month. And we got to a point where people could tell the difference between the varieties, and people could pick it up visually, because we always did a visual evaluation, and it was amazing. It was amazing how people could become so discerning when they were exposed to the fruit over time.
Yeah.
So I think it's possible. It's not going to happen overnight, but pre-1975, when Hass became the dominant, we had a lot of different avocado varieties that we marketed.
Yeah. So what varieties are going to do well in the San Joaquin Valley?
I don't know. If you have a crystal ball, you can let me know. Right now, what we have a trial at Lynn Cove, and Hass produces, but the fruit size is small. Gem produces better. To me, Carmen has been the big surprise to me there. We have that in our trial. It only blooms once a year up here. Amazing, only blooms once a year. And it seems to be doing quite well up here. The preliminary yield data we have looks encouraging. So maybe Carmen will find us niche in California up in the San Joaquin Valley. The UCR V04, which started off as sort of a weak tree that I was very, very worried about whether it would make it up here. It's doing, it took 2 or 3 years for it to really start coming into production, and amazingly, it's doing well. The UCR V01 seems to be doing pretty good. We don't have Lamb-Hass in our trial, but I've seen Lamb-Hass up here. It does well. It's more heat tolerant. I think we're just going to have to play around, and there are growers up here now that are planting avocados, and we will find out here in short order, I think.
Well, with that, it's time to go home. Thank you, Mary Lou. Thank you, Tim. Our next grower seminar is in April, so watch out for it. It's going to be at Cal Poly, and faculty at Cal Poly are going to be talking all things avocado. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day.